How is everybody doing today? I am going to be reading the Article 3 of the 1776 book. This one is a Constitution of Principles. It is one thing to discern and assert the true principles of political legitimacy and justice. It is quite another to establish those principles among an actual people in an actual government here on earth. As Winston Churchill put it, in a not dissimilar context, even the best of men struggling in the most just of causes cannot guarantee victory. They can only deserve it. And a note I'd like to make about that is sometimes only God knows why that is. That you could be fighting a just cause but losing every step of the way. The founders of the United States perhaps miraculously achieved what they were set out to achieve. They defeated the world's strongest military and financial power and won their independence. They then faced the task of forming a country that would honor and implement the principles upon which they had declared their independence. And just think of that, guys. The world's strongest military at the time was defeated by the people. The bedrock upon which the American political system is built is the rule of law. The vast difference between tyranny and rule of law is a central theme of political thinkers back to classical antiquity, like the Magna Carta. The idea is that the law is superior to rulers is the cornerstone of English constitutional thought as it's developed over the centuries. The concept was transferred to the American colonies and can be expressed throughout colonial pamphlets and political writings, as Thomas Paine reflected in Common Sense. For as in absolute governments the king is the law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. But lest any ill use should afterwards arise, let the crown at the conclusion of the ceremony be demolished and scattered among the people whose right it is. We also have a quote here from Alexander Hamilton. The safety of a republic depends essentially on the energy of a common national sentiment, on a uniformity of principles and habits, on the exemption of the citizens from foreign bias and prejudice, and on that love of the country which will almost invariably be found to be closely connected with birth, education, and family. Alexander Hamilton. To assure such a government, Americans demanded a written legal document that would create both structure and a process for securing their rights and liberties, and spell out the divisions and limits of the powers of government. That legal document that must be above ordinary legislation in day-to-day politics. That is what the founders meant by Constitution, and why our Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Their first attempt at a form of government, the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, was adopted in the midst of the Revolutionary War, and not ratified until 1781. During that time, American statesmen and citizens alike concluded that the Articles were too weak to fulfill a government's core functions. This consensus produced the Constitutional Convention of 1787, which met in Philadelphia that summer to write the document which we have today. It is a testament to those farmers' wisdom and skill that the Constitution they produced remains the longest continually operating written Constitution in all of human history. Once again, guys, this is the longest. This Constitution has survived longer than any other rule of land in history. The meaning and purpose of the Constitution of 1787, however, cannot be understood without recourse to the human principles of the Declaration of Independence. Human equality, the requirement for government by consent, and the securing of natural rights, which the Constitution is intended to embody, protect, and nurture. Lincoln famously described the principles of the Declaration of Independence, borrowing from Proverbs 25:11, as an apple of God, and the Constitution as a frame of silver meant to adorn and preserve the apple. The form of the new government that the Constitution delineates is informed in part by the charges the Declaration levels at the British Crown. For instance, the colonists charged the British king with failing to provide or even interfering with representative government. Hence, the Constitution provides for a representative legislature. It also charges the king with a concentrating executive, legislative, and judicial power into the same hands, which James Madison pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Instead, the founders organized their new government into three co-equal branches, checking and balancing the power of each against the other to reduce the risk of abuse of power. Thank you guys. I'll be continuing this elsewhere in DC. Please stick around.